Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series by PharmaVOICE. This episode was made possible by a generous sponsorship from GSW. For more information on GSW, please visit gsw-w.com. In this episode, Taryn meets with Charlotte Jones-Burton, MD, MS, Cardiovascular Development Team Lead, Innovative Medicines at Bristol Myers Squibb.
Dr. Jones-Burton, welcome to the PharmaVOICE WOW podcast program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be speaking with you today, Taryn.
It is our pleasure to have you. I'm really intrigued by your title, Cardiovascular Development Team Lead, Innovative Medicines. Can you tell me about your role at Bristol Myers Squibb?
Yes, so my title, as you've mentioned, is Development Team Leader, and what this role entails is that I'm responsible for leading a cross-functional team that's working all the way from discovery to commercialization for medicines that are in our cardiovascular therapeutic area at Bristol Myers Squibb. Specifically, I work with our head of cardiovascular development to ensure that the strategy that has been outlined is well developed and then is executed, and helping our team really identify and solve for any roadblocks or challenges that will occur. What I like to say is that I'm a conductor in the orchestra, and I'm really leading and conducting the orchestra.
I love that analogy. So really, you're working from molecule to market. Is this a new approach in terms of development for the organization?
So this is not a new approach. However, I think it's when I talk about the role of this conductor, if you will, I think that the conductor approach is something that is not really the way that people usually explain it, but this role is not a new way of thinking. I do think that this role has been in existence and is a role that you typically see across different companies. However, there may be a slight tweak in the terminology of the title.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds like you have your hands full just with that, but I also know you have a particular passion around driving diversity in clinical trials, particularly for racial and gender minorities. I'd like to talk to you about what some of the historical barriers have been, and then what your vision and goals are for the future to make sure that there's improved representation of these underserved patient populations.
So I think one of the key barriers to diversity in clinical trials is really a systemic one that isn't frequently talked about, and I would like to give some time here to talk about that. And what that systemic barrier is really a lack of diversity represented along the process from drug discovery all the way through the development and commercialization process. And I see that this lack of diversity happens within academic institutions as well as in the pharmaceutical industry as well. And diversity amongst those who are responsible, for developing the strategy, discovering and developing the medicines is critical, and here's why. Because it's important to ensure that our clinical trials are designed to support the inclusion of many different populations. Gender diversity, as you've mentioned, racial, ethnic diversity. And the reason why that's important is because it will allow the data to be generalizable to the broadest populations, and at the end of the day, that's really what we're striving. So my vision for the future would be to increase this representation that I believe is lacking of diverse populations throughout this full process from bench to bedside, which is what we physicians like to say. And what that means is really from basic research to the patients. In order to do this, I think there really does need to be a commitment, a well-defined goal, and a way of monitoring to ensure that the goal is realized. And there's one area where I do see that we have been successful in terms of diversity within clinical trials, and that really is around geographic diversity. And this is really how that was achieved. So I believe that it could be achievable for other areas of diversity.
So, Dr. Jones-Burton, how is this vision being realized within your organization?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So what I'll say is that we have had an intense focus on ensuring that our workforce is diverse and that our leaders operate within an environment where inclusion is important. So not only having the diversity, but also having the inclusion. And that allows leaders to feel empowered. And a part of that empowerment is making sure that we have diversity along every aspect of the drug discovery, development, and commercialization process. So take myself as an example. I am empowered to make decisions with my team, and I have a diverse team. And we have diverse representation in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, age, you name it, geography. We have people who are from the U.S., people outside of the U.S. And what that does is that allows for different perspectives and insights to be baked into the work that we're doing. And also a lot of the work that we do is we have advisors whom we work with, expert scientists and other clinicians and healthcare providers. And it allows for us to realize that diversity and actually seek out that diversity in those advisors who we're working with to design clinical trials. So that's just an example of how this is being realized within my company, Bristol Myers Squibb.
That's wonderful. Are there any metrics that you're looking at in terms of milestones, and how will you know that you've achieved your goals?
I do think that we have metrics on the team level. What I think is so interesting is my team knows this is something that I'm committed to, and the more that we have these interactions, I might ask the question. What I'm finding is that I don't necessarily have to ask the question. My team members are, presenting me with options and actually pointing out where the diversity lies. And sometimes the diversity isn't obvious, so it's important to have those questions. So I'll say I think there is some room for us to grow in terms of metrics, but I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing within even my own team.
That's wonderful, and I think you're right. I think there is room for improvement, but certainly every step forward is a step towards, greater diversity. So I applaud you for the work that you're doing. Specifically within the CT programs, what kinds of initiatives are your researchers using to promote diversity?
Yes. So one initiative, and I just kind of alluded to it, is really this focus on ensuring that our workforce is representative of the populations that we're aiming to treat with our medicines. And we at Bristol Myers Squibb have a focus within our people and business resource groups. And these groups, and we have one group devoted specifically to women. We have another group devoted to Black employees, another group devoted to Latina employees, and there are others. We have committed the resource to have those led by a full-time person. And how that shows up is that each of those groups really do help inform the business that we are conducting. So that commitment is very important. Another initiative that we have is an initiative, as I've spoken, is basically that I've spoken about with myself, is leadership development of individuals that represent diverse populations, such as myself. I'm an African American woman, and having the investment for my leadership development really allows me to then have my fingerprint on this for the teams in which I lead. At the end of the day, I think it's important to understand that we need to build a robust pipeline. And that pipeline really starts with scientists as well as other individuals who are trained to lead clinical trials. And these are typically called young scientist programs. So having that commitment to make sure that we are not just looking at the workforce, the current workforce, but the future workforce. And then the final initiative that I'll bring up is really having an interest in our young students in terms of STEM initiatives. And to that end, I have, with the support of Bristol Myers Squibb, 5 years ago, developed a program that has provided shadowing opportunities at Bristol Myers Squibb each summer for students of color to really come in and understand what it might mean to have a career in science and medicine. And really that's meant to inspire them. You can't be what you can't see. So those types of programs are very important and really reach children who are middle school, early high school, at the time where they might be making some critical decisions about what they want to do when they go into their college years.
I think that's wonderful work you're doing, and I wish you continued success. When we talk about clinical trials and the recruitment of patients into those clinical trials, we recognize that there is a lack of diversity there as well. So how can companies such as yours, Bristol Myers Squibb, as well as others working in the pharmaceutical space, address those different patient populations to encourage them to join a clinical trial?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I really do believe I really do believe that we do have to begin with the end in mind, and I like the way that you phrased the statement, which is really thinking about the patients and being very clear of the proportion of different populations that are reflected in terms of a disease state. And once you have that in mind, clearly it's having an understanding of needing to reach out to experts who are treating those types of patients so that you can bring the insights in, have those clinicians, experts, inform the work that's being done very early on so that we don't have those systematic barriers that I talked about at the beginning. And the more that we can do that, the more of the commitment to ensure that we have diversity along every aspect of the process, I think we will achieve the state of having diversity in clinical trials, as well as, and I will state again why that's important, so that the data that we are getting is generalizable to a broad population and so that our medicines get to the right patients.
Excellent. Your passion is so great around this topic that you co-founded the Women of Color in Pharma in 2015. I'd love to hear more about this organization, its mission, and the response from the industry.
Yes, so as you have stated, I'm quite passionate about making sure that we have diverse representation within the pharmaceutical and life sciences industry, that I was so compelled to pull together a group of women and start an organization called Women of Color in Pharma. And the vision of the organization is to transform the pharmaceutical industry with women of color, and the mission is to empower those women of color to seek their professional and personal development so that they can have roles of impact, as I believe I have achieved. And it's really to ensure that there is a strategic network where people feel that they have a safe and nurturing environment so that they can, grow to where they would like to grow within the industry and their career.
Wonderful. I wish you continued success with that organization as well, because it is important work that you're doing, and the messages are really quite relevant today. So I applaud you.
Thank you.
Let's look to the future of the industry. What excites you about where you see drug development, commercialization, or the business models going as we look forward to 2020?
I think what is really exciting to me is the pace at which we're seeing things change within the macro environment, and it's translating into the industry. I also think that we're in a time where we are becoming hyper-focused on the patient. And the reason why that's exciting is because I think that is going to drive a lot of the innovation and the speed at which we move. So those are the things that excite me about the industry. I also think, and I like to solve problems, I also think that there are some challenges that are ahead, particularly as it relates to cardiovascular research. There are some challenges in making sure that we continue to focus on cardiovascular research. Cardiovascular disease is the number one killer across the world, and making sure that there isn't this notion of false optimism that we've solved all of the problems and that cardiovascular disease is no longer a public health issue, I think is one of the biggest issues that are confronting us, ensuring that we continue to have funding for cardiovascular research. So I love to state problems and also build solutions to those problems. So that does excite me about the future of the industry.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about the cardiovascular space, because I think you're right. I think it is, obviously it's the number one killer, but it so often is overshadowed by the new innovations happening in cancer, the lack of treatments in Alzheimer's and dementia that are getting a lot of visibility or attention right now. Yet we haven't solved one of the biggest challenges in healthcare, and that's cardiovascular disease.
I think that's spot on, and I definitely would agree with you. And I think we need to give you a microphone so that you can begin to be an ambassador for cardiovascular disease, because I think you definitely have your finger on the pulse. And we can look at some diseases like heart failure, for example, and if you compare the mortality that's associated with that, and you compare it with some cancers, you may see that some similarities. And so that's why it's important for those of us who, and I believe that we're all touched by cardiovascular disease, and that's why it's so important for us to continue to have the conversation, but not to just speak. I think innovation is very important, and really trying to think through in the clinical trial space, what things can we do, not only to make people aware of the calamity of the situation, but also think through what types of data could we use. We're in this era of big data, electronic medical records, so we have a lot of data at our fingertips. How can we use that to evolve the clinical trial space so that we don't have these large trials that take very long time to deliver, because we know patients are waiting.
I think that's the key. Patients are waiting. And yet, let's talk about big data. There is so much data out there. Are you finding that there's also now a trend to go to little data, where there are specific data points that are becoming more relative as they get culled from these big data sets?
So I think that particularly in the cardiovascular space, one of the challenges that we have is that because there has been so much innovation and so much research, that there are defined endpoints that are required and really do require long trials to really understand whether a therapeutic intervention impacts it. That sometimes and where I think there will be more focus on is what you're bringing up and how we actually incorporate that into our decision making within the clinical trial space. So more to come on that.
I look forward to hearing more about that from you as we go forward. To switch tacks a little bit here, I'd like to talk to you, Doctor, about some of the things that you've learned along the way, some of the lessons that you've learned that you might share with other women who want to reach a level of impact as you have, or influence, as I like to say, within your organization? Are there things that you know now that you wish you knew before?
Absolutely. Lots of lessons that have been learned. But I think if I had to distill it down to a few, I would say it's important to do the work to understand what your passion is, what your purpose is, and what your potential is. It's important to develop meaningful relationships that you can leverage along the journey, your career journey. It's going to be a marathon, so it's important to have those relationships. And then I think it's really important to show up with your ABCs, and with that, what I mean is your attitude of gratitude. It's an awesome responsibility to be in a position to change people's lives. And therefore, you must approach it with this attitude of gratitude. The B stands for a belief in yourself. It's really important that you have that. And then C stands for the courage to use your voice. And I would just accentuate that, because I think it did take me a while to find that courage, to go within and find that courage. But that is actually, very important for us to do, particularly as women and as Black women as well.
I love those ABCs. I think they are fantastic tips for everyone who is looking to progress their career. So thank you for sharing. You touched on it earlier about your leadership style of being a conductor. How did you figure out that was the right way to lead for yourself?
That's an interesting question, Taryn. I think I did the work, as I just mentioned, to really understand what are my values. And when I did that work, it really pointed to a few key things that I think are important in that role of connector. And one of those things is wanting to help people. Another thing is wanting to get people together. So collaboration is really important to me. And then it's willingness and a desire to serve. So those are things that are really important that I value. And then when I thought through, okay, here are the things that I value, and maybe here's my list of strengths, which I won't bore you with those, it naturally led to that type of role in terms of that conductor role. And I absolutely love, that role.
I would never be bored. I want to hear about your strengths, because I think those are important things for other women to hear about how you self-identify. So I'm not bored. Tell me about your strengths.
Yeah, no worries. So I think I am, I do like to solve problems, so you just heard me mention that. I think that I'm solution-oriented. I'm optimistic. So I don't see the glass as half empty. I see it as half full. I also think that I have a strong sense of communication, which is definitely important when you're working with a group of people. And I like people, too. I think that's a strength, and we need to call that out. So those are the key ones that I would say that I married with, okay, here are my values, and then I thought through potential roles, and that kind of landed me in a role of where I want to be the conductor. I want to lead leaders, if you will.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I know I pushed you there a little bit, but I'm happy to have heard those. I think you are a people person, and it comes across very clearly. You've had a lot of successes in your career, a lot of accolades, and you've achieved so much. Could you please narrow down for me one wow moment of your career that you can share?
So this was challenging to do, and what I'm going to say is, and please allow me to provide some context.
Absolutely.
The wow moment was walking across the stage to get my medical degree. And the reason why that was the wow moment of my lifetime is because I wasn't supposed to walk across that stage, because people who look like me, who come from a background where I come from, which is rural Arkansas, where 18,000 people live in my town, 85% of them live below the poverty line. Those are not the people that walk across the stage at a prestigious institution to receive a degree. There were so many adversities that were in front of me, and closest to my graduation, I was pregnant, and I was on bed rest, and I had a baby that weighed 1 pound 13 ounces. So there were so many obstacles that were put in front of me to overcome, but I did it. So I would say to you that that was my wow moment, and I carry that with me, and I know that even though any adversity comes in front of me, I kind of have that mindset that if I did that, I can do anything that's put in front of my path.
I would say that is a big wow. So congratulations to you for not only having the courage and the belief in yourself, but the fortitude and the resilience to keep going forward and to being such a positive influence on the industry. We're all very in debt to you, so thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I loved hearing your story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series. And thanks again to GSW for sponsoring this program. For more information on GSW, please visit gsw-w.com. We also encourage you to listen to additional episodes at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2019 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks LLC.